What's happening, MMA fans? This is Ryan Thomas, of course, hopping back on the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. It's been a little bit since I've been on the show. A lot going on. Obviously, I appreciate, I want to, let everybody know that, over this last weekend, I lost my grandmother. I got a lot of really awesome condolences from people that listen to the show, or Facebook friends, or YouTube subscribers, or Apple Podcast people that I met on there, and I really appreciate all of the support at this very difficult time for me. It's been a difficult few days, but I wanted to hop on here, being that fight fans look forward to the show, look forward to tuning in, and I look forward to giving you my preview and predictions for every MMA event. And this show also has helped me take my mind off of a lot of things, throughout the years. And this is something that you don't want to use it to take your mind off it, obviously, but it's a welcome, time, killer as far as in this process. This is something that will help me. So I really appreciate all the love and support. This is the Thomas Take Sports Podcast, UFC 259 preview and prediction show. Not one, not two, but three titles are on the line Saturday night. UFC 259 on pay-per-view. This is a solid pay-per-view. I'm very excited for this pay-per-view. This was one that was circled on the calendar for quite some time. Not only is there three title fights on this card, you got some former champions on this card. You got Dominic, Cruz as the main event of the prelims. That's something that I haven't said ever. Dominic Cruz versus Kenney, a young up-and-coming fighter, 16-2-1 in his own right. Joseph Benavidez, former two-time flyweight, three-time flyweight title challenger, fights Askar Askarov, who is undefeated as a pro. And early flyweight bout features Rodrigo Bontorin versus a fighter by the name of Kai Kara France, who has put on some entertaining bouts in his UFC career. And then when you go to the main card, obviously, as I said, not one, not two, but three UFC title fights. Lightweight division, you got Islam Makhachev versus Drew Dober. I'm very excited for that one. Light heavyweight, you got Thiago Santos, a former title contender, against Alexander Rakic, who has made his presence known in this UFC light heavyweight division. So that's, a good way to start the card is to start it by having a light heavyweight bout to start the card. And then to end the card, you have a light heavyweight bout, a title bout. So be very interesting to see how this card kind of impacts the UFC and impacts these light heavyweight divisions. But in particular, in this preview show and prediction show, I'm going to preview the biggest fights that this card offers, which, of course, is the three title fights. I'll give you my fight picks for the entire card at the end of the show, but the nuts and bolts of this show will be myself diving into how I see these matchups playing themselves out, as well who I see winning the fight. Which are two different things in the world of MMA. How it plays out stylistically doesn't always come to fruition, but it could change the results of who wins, who loses. So first up, Pyotr Yan versus Aljamain Sterling for the UFC 135-pound men's bantamweight belt. Pyotr Yan is coming off of two very impressive performances, but they're performances nonetheless that are against aging competition, as far as competition with plenty of wear and tear, with all due respect to the great Uriah Faber, with all due respect to the great Jose Aldo. Those are fighters that are at the last, leg of their career. And Pyotr Yan did what I thought he would do, did what most thought he could do in there against Uriah Faber, especially, and Jose Aldo. That first round, things were a little bit even between the two, but as the rounds kind of waned, we saw on that Fight Island card, Yan just kind of took that fight over. He's a very well-rounded champion. I won't say for the sake of business he is the most entertaining champion that's out there. I feel like this division needs a little bit of a promotional juice. And Aljamain Sterling is that guy. No doubt about it. Aljamain Sterling is that guy that I think could provide this division with the kind of shot of adrenaline that it needs, I think. And This is a long time coming for Aljamain Sterling. You know, he had that really big loss against Marlon Moraes where he was knocked out. It was a devastating knockout. And I really feel as if this is his opportunity. This is his time. So for Aljamain Sterling to finally get this opportunity, I don't think it's going to go to waste. And I think this will be a well-rounded, highly skilled fight between two highly skilled mixed martial artists. We'll see this fight go everywhere, is what I'm trying to say. This fight will go on the feet, on the mat, against the fence. I see this fight being an all-out battle, a true championship fight. But I do have to say that this is probably my biggest lock of the card. I'm going with Aljamain Sterling. I think Aljamain Sterling's going to get it done. I think his time is now. I think that Aljamain Sterling has been waiting for this opportunity. He finally gets this opportunity, and I think he's going to make the most of it. I think that this is Aljamain Sterling's fight to lose. The opportunity for him is now, obviously, as I've said, and really looking at that last win in Sterling's career over Corey Sandhagen, who was doing big things coming off of that knockout win over Frankie Edgar in his own right. Aljamain Sterling, he is probably mentally feeling as confident as ever. And Yan, I just don't know if he is as legitimate a champion as some of the other champions in the sport of mixed martial arts. Not to say that his reign wasn't deserved. Not to say that he didn't do enough to win the title. He definitely did. He was given a title shot against Jose Aldo. He beat him. He's the rightful champ. But I think there are some holes in his game. I think there are ways for Aljamain Sterling to get it done. I think Jan's a great fighter. You got to be a great fighter to become a champion in this sport, but I don't know if he's great enough to defend that title. And with this 135-pound division being its own somewhat mini Shark Tank in comparison to the big Shark Tank of the 155-pound lightweight division, I think this 135-pound division has a lot of talent in it. I mentioned Corey Sandhagen. We see some great performances from guys like Pedro Munoz, who's coming off a win over Jimmy Rivera. The division has a lot of depth and a lot of pieces. Cody Garbrandt coming off of a big win in his own right against Rafael Assunção. What's next for him? I'm looking forward to seeing how this 135-pound division kind of shakes out beyond this title fight, but the division itself is very entertaining. Got the impending return of TJ Dillashaw. So really, if this fight's close and it's entertaining and we don't know who is the true winner, they might do it again. They might rematch it. But I think this fight will be a back-and-forth battle, but I see Aljamain Sterling winning via finish late in the fight, probably 4th or 5th round submission. I think the jiu-jitsu game of Aljamain Sterling is very slick, and it seems like he has tapped into that jiu-jitsu game much, much more than he has in his previous fights. The co-main event, the women's featherweight title is on the line as the female fighting GOAT, the greatest female fighter of all time, Amanda Nunez, the UFC women's bantamweight champion and the UFC women's featherweight champion, puts that featherweight title up for grabs, the title that she took from Chris Cyborg. She took the title from Chris Cyborg. She took the mantle of being considered as the greatest female fighter of all time. And now she's facing, I think, physically her toughest test in her entire career in Megan Anderson. I think that when you have a champion in 2 weight classes, obviously that fighter is great. But when you have a champion in 2 weight classes that's defended the title in 2 weight classes, that's just another level of greatness. And Amanda Nunez has done that. So, I say greatest female fighter of all time. When are we going to put Amanda Nunez in just one of the greatest fighters of all time? I'd be willing to throw her into that consideration right here, right now. Megan Anderson is probably I believe she is physically the toughest test for Amanda Nunez. She's taller, she's longer, she's lankier. And when they faced off today at the UFC press conference, she looked stronger, physically stronger. So, I'm talking muscle here, but that doesn't mean anything. We know that. We know that with the middleweight champion right now, Israel Adesanya, he went toe-to-toe with Paulo Costa. Physically, you'd think Costa would walk right through him, but that's what makes this sport so great. It's not about the physicality or lack thereof between one fighter and the next. It's about the MMA fighting IQ inside the octagon Whether you have that, whether you don't, whether you're able to implement your strengths and minimize your weaknesses, that's the main objective for any fighter in any title fight, let alone fight in general. So, I think that Amanda Nunez obviously has the clear-cut advantage in this one. She's got the experience. The championship lights have shined on her for so long now. It's really tough for me to pick against her. Realistically, I can't pick against her. With wins over Holly Holm, with wins over Chris Cyborg, with wins over Miesha Tate, with wins over Ronda Rousey. And those four ladies, all in their own right, could be Hall of Famers in mixed martial arts history. She finished all of them. She TKO'd Ronda. She submitted Miesha Tate at UFC 200. She TKO'd Holly Holm. She TKO'd Chris Cyborg. She's the best. There's nobody better. And I think the UFC has tremendously missed the boat on promoting Amanda Nunez the proper way. And what I mean by that is she should be a much bigger star than what she is. She should be, mentioned in the same light as, some of the greats that we've seen in combat sports. She is that special of a fighter. And I think that hopefully if she does get this win, like I predict she will, I do think this will be a knockout. There is something about the power that Amanda Nunez has in her hands that the ladies just can't take. Anytime they're punched by her, early in a fight, they're like, wow, this girl, she hits like a truck. So, I think Amanda Nunez will get it done. I'm going to predict, though, that it's actually a 3-round fight. It'll last 3 rounds. I think Amanda Nunez will TKO Megan Anderson in the 3rd round, a little bit early in the 3rd round. I see a feeling out process between Anderson and Nunez, and maybe Amanda Nunez is able to, or maybe Anderson, is able to implement her game plan a little bit early in the fight. And then 2nd round, Amanda Nunez is able to clip her there towards the tail end of the round. And then the 3rd round, we start to see, Nunez really start to take over. So that's how I see that fight going down. Amanda Nunez with the win and still UFC featherweight champion, women's featherweight champion. And I think that, these weight classes, the women's bantamweight division is far more girthier in terms of the depth that the division has, whereas this women's featherweight division, really, if Amanda Nunez gets past Megan Anderson, to be honest, I asked myself, what is next for her at that point? What would be the next fight? Who would be the next opponent? Who would be the opponent that would make the most sense for her? It's very tough to say who would be next for her, given that she's beaten, the who's who. Look at who she has beaten. Look who she has walked through. And, if she adds Megan Anderson to her resume, I mean, does she retire? That's something that I'll definitely talk about in the post-fight show once the fight actually takes place. So to to recap here, Pyotr Yan versus Aljamain Sterling. I got Aljo winning that fight. I think he is far better now than he was even a couple years ago, and he was this close to getting a title shot there against, at the time, the champion TJ Dillashaw. Dillashaw then moved down to flyweight to take on Henry Cejudo. TJ tested positive while losing to Henry Cejudo. Cejudo then fought the winner of Marlon Moraes versus Aljamain Sterling, which was Marlon Moraes. And it kind of sent, it set Aljo back a little bit. So Aljamain Sterling, back in the swing of things, this big win off of Corey Sandhagen, gets his title shot, and much deserved. I think that Pyotr Yan is in for it. I think I think Aljamain Sterling is going to get this done. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. That's what makes this so fun, calling these fights, predicting these fights. How do I see these fights? How do I see these fights going down? How do I break them down? To me, I just think Aljamain Sterling has a very unique ground game that I don't know if Pyotr Yan has ever faced anything quite like that. So I'm going with Sterling in that one. And then obviously I can't go against the Lioness, Amanda Nunez versus Megan Anderson. I think that Nunez is going to get it done. I think she's going to get it done in the 3rd round. And last, and certainly not least, the main event, the fight of the night on March 6th, Saturday night. You got Jan Blachowicz, the UFC light heavyweight champion, versus UFC middleweight champion Israel Adesanya. arguably the biggest superstar in the sport right now. And yeah, that says a lot, being that Conor McGregor is obviously the cash cow, but Israel Adesanya in his own right has had his own meteoric rise on his way to a UFC middleweight championship. He is undefeated and undisputed as the UFC middleweight champion, moving up a weight class to take on the Polish powerhouse known as Jan Blachowicz. Jan, in his own right, he had a little bit of a peaks and valleys-esque career. He is on the top of the mountain now as the UFC light heavyweight champion. At one point, he was almost released from the UFC following a 500 stint in about 4 or 5 fights, I think it was. He was 4 fights. He was 500. He was 2-2 or 2-3, something like that. He bounces back. He gets some big wins over Luke Rockhold, namely. That knockout was picture perfect. And then this fight versus Dominic Reyes for the vacated UFC at the time, for the vacant UFC light heavyweight title. I thought Reyes, with the success that he had against John Jones, Reyes was going to go in there against Yan and do what he likes to do. That didn't happen. I was definitely wrong on that one. Yan went in there, he landed his hard shots, landed a nasty body kick that left a large welt on the back of Dominic Reyes. That's how hard the kick was. The foot wrapped around, and it actually left a welt on Reyes's back, not his side. So this is a champion versus champion fight. And I want to take a step back here and just kind of realize what that actually means. There are champion versus champion fights in combat sports very seldomly, and each one of them has been very historic. They've provided historic moments in the fashion in which they've ended. Conor McGregor beating Eddie Alvarez at UFC 205, that might be the biggest moment in the history of the sport. George St. Pierre fighting BJ Penn, that was a massive moment in the sport. That was the first time the UFC decided to do a actual champion versus champion fight. And then there's these rumblings about, Anderson Silva versus George St. Pierre, or, John Jones versus George St. Pierre, or let's just say Matt Hughes versus Anderson Silva. You could go down the list all day long as far as possible champion versus champion fights that never came to fruition. So the fact that this one was signed and this one was delivered to us, I'm thankful for that. God willing, these guys don't get COVID or these guys don't get hurt. We're going to see a really good fight between Jan Blachowicz and Israel Adesanya. And this matchup is so interesting because Israel Adesanya is a light in the loafers middleweight. Walks around probably around 195. Only cuts 10 pounds to get to the UFC 185-pound weight limit. Championship weight, 185 pounds. So going into this one, what will be very interesting is weigh-in day, which is tomorrow. We're going to find out tomorrow what Izzy weighs heading into this one. And if Izzy is underweight, if Izzy ranges from like 190 to 195, which is his normal walk-around weight, I would not be shocked, obviously, because it is his normal walk-around weight. But he will be outweighed by probably 30, 35 pounds in this fight. And that's a difference. That's a clear-cut difference that Israel Adesanya has never had to deal with before. So when you put yourself in a situation of something that you've never dealt with before as a fighter and seeing fighters do this in combat sports, I think to myself, it usually goes very, very well, or it goes horribly wrong. More oftentimes than not, it actually does go fairly well. And is Israel Adesanya the type of superstar, the type of fighter that could go up a weight class and get a win? 100%. Are his skills dynamic enough to lead him to victory against anyone? Yeah, they are. Regardless of size, regardless of weight advantage or weight disadvantage, Israel Adesanya is the real deal. And when you go into a fight, previewing Israel Adesanya and Paulo Costa, I say to myself, this is the guy. Paulo Costa is the guy that I think will give Israel Adesanya the most trouble that he's ever seen in his entire career. I didn't say Paulo Costa would win, but I said Paulo Costa would put up some sort of a fight. Paulo Costa put up no fight. There was no fight there. Israel Adesanya beat him pillar to post, made him look average, made him look ordinary, made him look like he didn't even belong in the UFC. And this was a fighter in Paulo Costa who he himself, heading into the fight between Costa and Adesanya, was undefeated as well. It was undefeated champion, undefeated challenger. Who's going to take the W? Israel Adesanya didn't just take the W. He beat Paulo Costa down and embarrassed him badly. Now you got Costa making excuses that, he was drinking wine before the fight, that he wasn't really quite mentally there, and just all this hoopla that, let's just face it, Paulo Costa, for lack of a better term, you got your ass whooped in there that night. It wasn't your night, wasn't your day. It is what it is. It happens to the best of us. And, dust yourself off and make that comeback, which I definitely think he can and will. He's got a big fight against Robert Whittaker in his own right, April 17th, I believe. So that's another middleweight fight to keep our eye on beyond this one. Could dictate who Israel Adesanya fights next. But this fight is very interesting because I think Yan Blachowicz could also knock Adesanya. And that's a very bold prediction to make, but Yan Blachowicz has been steamrolling his last few opponents. Rockhold, obviously, being one of them. Corey Anderson being another. And Dominic Reyes. I mean, those are three guys that on any given night, those guys could be the champion of the UFC light heavyweight division if they showed up right. You know what I mean? If they show up with the best of their skills. On their best day, Luke Rockhold, call me crazy, on his best day, he could be a UFC light heavyweight champion. On Dominic Reyes' best day, he could be a UFC light heavyweight champion if you got competent judges. It's a shot at the John Jones fight. And Corey Anderson, he could have been a UFC light heavyweight champion, and he might end up being a Bellator light heavyweight champion now that he's in Bellator MMA. So, what I'm saying here is that both of these guys are legit, and I think that this is a battle between two champions that is probably one of the better champion versus champion fights that I've, predicted or previewed in recent memory. Just because, Yan is a new champ, but he's been around a long time. He's paid his dues. Now he's got this awesome opportunity to take on, the active. As it stands right now, I believe Israel Adesanya is the biggest superstar in the sport. He has something that Conor McGregor doesn't have. He has a belt, and he also has a style that bends each and every way, and he has and pertaining to that style, it's a style that is reminiscent of a fighter that people grew to love when they first started watching the UFC, and that's Anderson Silva. And obviously, when they fought each other, it was like watching two of the same people fight. It was like watching Adesanya versus Adesanya or Anderson versus Anderson. It was amazing. It was awesome. So, obviously, Israel Adesanya's evolved since then. That was a couple years back. His title-winning performance against Robert Whittaker was just a epic, symphony of destruction. And moving forward, the Paulo Costa fight, it's like with each fight, each and every single fight, Israel Adesanya gets better. And that's crazy. To me, it's very tough. As I said about Amanda Nunez, it's very tough for me to pick against Israel Adesanya. I think Israel Adesanya is going to get it done. But furthermore, I think he's going to battle some true adversity. And we're going to see the true championship grit and determination out of Israel Adesanya that we know that he has. We know that he's capable of. Yan Blachowicz could very well knock him out. I'm going to say it. It could happen. But I am picking Israel Adesanya in this one. I think he's going to get it done via, I think this one might actually go to decision. I think it might. And people might say, well, how, if this one goes to decision, something went horribly wrong for Israel Adesanya. Might be just enough. Might be just enough for him to get it done. So 3 title fights: Yan, Sterling, Amanda Nunez, Megan Anderson, Yan Blachowicz, Israel Adesanya. I'm very pumped for these fights. It is much needed. I got a lot going on right now, and I need a night to kind of, go back to normal with, all the stuff going on. So Thank you guys for tuning in, mixed martial arts fans. I want to let you know, subscribe to the Thomas Take Sports Podcast on Apple Podcasts and leave a review. The reviews matter. They count. They add up. And a positive review goes a long, long way. So Spotify is out there as well, the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. It's on the biggest podcast apps, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts. Feel free to leave a review. Whether you're tuning in for the NFL content, Buffalo Bills content, combat sports content, NHL hockey content, I got a lot to talk about in terms of the Buffalo Sabres. Believe you me, you don't want to miss that. That's coming up this week. So stay tuned for more. That was the UFC 259 preview and prediction show. I'm Ryan Thomas. You can follow me on Twitter at Ryan Thomas Take. Take care, stay safe, and enjoy the fights this weekend.